going to read there beginning in chapter 13. As you know, we started speaking of the challenges of parenthood and the challenges that it involves as far as it concerns the family. And this evening we're going to look somewhat at a particular life and how that was affected a family relationship, and perhaps be able to understand some of the principles that we were speaking of this morning. So let's begin there in 2 Samuel chapter 13, and we'll read into the life of David and Absalom. These two lives that were so intertwined as father and son, and yet so completely defragmented that it ended in tragedy. Let's read there beginning in chapter 13 verse 1. And we'll be reading several verses, so do follow me, please. After this, Absalom, the son of David, had a lovely sister whose name was Tamar. And Amnon, the son of David, loved her. The word love here means to lust. Amnon was so distressed over his sister Tamar that he became sick, for she was a virgin, and it was improper for Amnon to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shemaiah, David's brother. Now Jonadab was a very crafty man. And he said to him, "Why are you, this king's son, becoming thinner day after day? Will you not tell me?" Amnon said to him, "I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." So Jonadab said to him, "Lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill, and when your father comes to see you, say to him, 'Please let my sister Tamar come and give me food, and prepare the food in my sight, that I may see it and eat it from her hand.'" Then Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, "Please let Tamar, my sister, come and make a couple of cakes for me in my sight, that I may eat from her hand." And David sent home to Tamar, saying, "Now go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him." So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, and he was lying down. Then she took flour and kneaded it, made cakes in his sight, and baked the cakes. And she took the pan and placed them out before him, but he refused to eat. Then Amnon said, "Have everyone go out from me," and they all went out from him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food into the bedroom, that I may eat from your hand." Tamar took the cakes, which she had made, and brought them to Amnon, her brother, in the bedroom. Now when she had brought them to him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, "Come, lie with me, my sister." But he answered him, she answered, "No, my brother, do not force me, for no such thing should be done in Israel. Do not do this disgraceful thing. And I, where could I take my shame? And as for you, you would be like one of the fools in Israel. Now therefore please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you." However, he would not heed her voice, and being stronger than she, he forced her and lay with her. Verse 19. Then Tamar put ashes on her head and poured her robe of many colors that was on her, and laid her hand on her head, and went away crying bitterly. And Absalom her brother said to her, "Has Amnon your brother been with you? But now hold your peace, my sister. Here is your brother. He is your brother. Do not take this thing to heart." So Tamar remained desolate in her brother Absalom's house. And then as we continue reading there, we're going to read a little further down in verse 23. "And it came to pass after 2 full years, that Absalom had a sheep shearers in Bezel Hazor, which is near Ephraim. So Absalom invited all the king's sons." Now drop down to verse 28. "Now Absalom had commanded his servants, saying, 'Watch now, When Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, strike Amnon, then kill him. Do not be afraid. Have I not commanded you? Be courageous and valiant. So the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and each one got on his mule and fled. And verses 37 through 39. But Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur, and David mourned for his son every day. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there 3 years. And King David longed to go to Absalom, for he had been comforted concerning Amnon, because he was dead. Now I'm going to pause here, and I want you to think a little bit of what has just transpired through these years. These are years. And relationships are crumbling as these years go by. And you see horrific things happening in this household. And as you can see, David as a father does not monitor his household. He's not dealing with little children, but he is dealing with young people under his authority as king and a father. And some horrid things happen. One member rapes another member, and then another member murders the rapist in a trap that he sets up for him. And of course, the entire situation is a tragedy. And so as we see that, we have been reading, first of all, what's considered to be a family turmoil. And it is very exhaustive to the family, to the father and the mothers, of course. And the situation is bad. But it gets worse because David does not really tend to healing the situation. David eventually brings Absalom back, but he does not try to correct his own errors, and he does not try to heal the situation between him and his son. First of all, he never had Amnon arrested. He never tried to comfort Tamar. He never spent time with the family trying to sort the whole situation out, and therefore did no justice in the matter. And because of that, the entire matter played out as it did, and ends in tragedy. Now let us look further and look at the family struggle here that occurs there as we continue reading in chapter 15. Notice verses 1 to 6. 2 Samuel 15, 1 to 6. After this, it happened that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. You see, Absalom is now designing. He is now engineering. He is now arranging and conspiring. He has a plan, and it's a plan against his own father. Keep reading verse 2. Now Absalom would rise early and stand beside the way of the gate. So it was whenever anyone who had a lawsuit came to the king for a decision, that Absalom would call him to him and say, "What city are you from?" And he would say, "Your servant is from such and such a tribe of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your case is good and right, but there's no deputy of the king to hear you." Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, would that I were made judge in the land, and everyone who is in his suit or cause would come to me, then I would give him justice." And it was so, whenever anyone came near to bow to him, that he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him. In this manner Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So you see, the people are not even getting their cases heard for the most part. So Absalom stands beside and he comforts them and takes their side of the matter and says, "Well, if I were in control, things would be different and you would be happy." And so now, as it says, he stole the hearts of the people. And as we read on in verse 10, then Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom reigns in Hebron. That is, they're announcing a new king. They're announcing a king that will now rule instead of David. And so, as we read on in verses 13 and forward, it says, now a messenger came to David, saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. So David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, arise and let us flee, or we shall not escape from Absalom. He knows what it means. There's going to be a coup d'etat, an overthrow of the present system. He says, make haste to depart, verse 14, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring disaster upon us and strike the city with the edge of the sword. And the king's servants said to the king, we're your servants, ready to do whatever my lord the king commands. He's saying, we're ready to fight. But David does not want to fight his son. And King David, verse 16, went out with all his household after him, but the king left 10 women, concubines, to keep the house. And the king went out with all the people after him and stopped at the outskirts. He escaped from the city. Then as you read on and you jump to chapter 18 of 2 Samuel, you'll read this, verse 1. And David numbered the people who were with him and set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. Now they're having decisive wars in Israel. This is a house divided. This is family struggle here. Turned into, the only distinction is now at the level of a political structure, but it's still a family struggle. And then in verse 4 you read these words. Then the king said to them, whatever seems best to you I will do. So the king stood beside the gate, and all the people went out by hundreds and by thousands. Now the king had commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains orders concerning Absalom. So the people went out into the field of battle against Israel, and the battle was in the woods of Ephraim. The people of Israel were overthrown there before the servants of David, and a great slaughter of 20,000 took place there that day. For the battle there was scattered over the face of the whole countryside, and the woods devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. In verse 9, then Absalom met the servants of David. Absalom rode on a mule. The mule went under the thick boughs of a great terebinth tree, and his head caught in the terebinth, so he was left hanging between heaven and earth. And the mule which was under him went on. Now, verse 10 says this, now a certain man saw it and told Joab, and said, I saw Absalom hanging in the terebinth tree. So Joab said to the men who told him, you just saw him, and why did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a belt. But the men said to Joab, though I were to receive 1,000 shekels of silver in my hand, I would not raise my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, beware lest anyone touch the young man Absalom. Otherwise I would have dealt falsely against my own life. For there's nothing hidden from the king, and you yourself would have set yourself against me. Then Joab said, I cannot linger with you. And he took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through Absalom's heart while he was still alive in the midst of the terebinth tree. And 10 young men who bore Joab's armor surrounded Absalom and struck him and killed him. So Joab blew the trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing Israel, for Joab held back the people. And they took Absalom and cast him in a large pit in the woods, and laid a very large heap of stones over him. Then all Israel fled, every one to his tent. And then we find the mourning heart in verse 32. And the king said to the Cushite, is the young man Absalom saved? So the Cushite answered, may the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise against you to do harm be like that young man. And David knew what he meant. Verse 33. Then the king was deeply moved, and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said thus, O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died in your place. O Absalom, my son, my son. And so here you have a father mourning for the tragic loss of his son. As we consider these matters, we realize what a broken relationship can bring into many lives, not just one. For in this case, because of the political structure involved, thousands and thousands died because of a family struggle. How many stories and historical accounts do we not know that began with a family battle? The Peloponnesian War of the Greeks with the Persians was a family war. And you read of the Elizabethan wars that occurred because of a family battle. You find wars occurring because there is no harmony in families. And as we spoke of this morning, we realized and we said how that marriage is God's creation so that the home might be created and provided for in a powerful and bonding relationship between a man and a woman with their children. We spoke how the word Bible as an acronym was given to a child as standing for basic instruction before leaving earth, which implied that biblical instruction is the only education that really deals with life after life and eternity as conscious beings. And we must all attend to that factor, for we are all members of a dying race. And if there is life beyond life, then the Bible is the book we must go to find the answers to those very crucial questions that we all ask about life after life. We spoke of material pursuits, how everything drips with responsibility. Sometimes we are taken by the need to provide things instead of ourselves to our family. Provision is that of personal presence and encouragement to our family more than anything else. We spoke of emotional energy in the household as parents. We work our best sometimes and leave less of ourselves for the family. Nothing is more fulfilling than the family time we can spend together. We have to learn to say no to the urgent things and yes to our family. We spoke of the verbal messages that we use in our families. The father's blessing or the father's cursing on a child can determine that child's entire future. There's nothing worse than a parent telling his or her child, you'll never amount to anything. He has placed a curse on that child. So the secret to leadership is not to lecture, but to lead. We always guide our children. Remember that our children learn our ways and then they refine them to perfection. Negative words destroy positive hearts, and loud voices shut open ears. Words are life or death to dreams, especially a child's dreams. We must remember that as parents, we must not have unrealistic expectations. Sometimes, as Christians, we tend to put over too much pressure upon our children and destroy their very faith in the process. I want you to see what Ecclesiastes says there in chapter 7 and verse 16. Notice what he advises the people. He says, do not be overly righteous, nor be overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself? He is saying there are extremes that you can go to, no matter how good the cause. Be careful, he says, because if you do not understand moderation, you may end up destroying everything you intended to save. And that includes our children. There is what's called the perfection syndrome. There's nothing as self-defeating as trying to be perfect and expecting the same of others. The perfectionist always pursues the impossible while neglecting, he pursues the impossible while neglecting the possible. The perfectionist always pursues the impossible while neglecting the possible. And mistakes should be expected. Mistakes can be lessons for personal maturity and growth. They are the signs of being human. So we must be very, very aware and careful and attentive and diligent in this area. And also we must remember the crucial area of sexual integrity. As husbands and wives, we must always be aware and cautious of this. In Galatians chapter 5, and we've read this verse several times, but I want us to see this, speaking of the power of the flesh, the power of the passions in the human soul. And the point the apostle is making is that if you are being religious without the Spirit of God in you, you will have no power over your soulish passions. And he says this in chapter 5 and verse 19 of Galatians, the letter to the Galatians. Now the works of the flesh are evident, which are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, dissensions, heresies, envies, murders, drunkenness, revelries, and the like, of which I tell you beforehand, just as I told you in past time, that those who practice such things will not enter the kingdom of heaven. These things can invade the household. These things can invade the marriage relationship and cause all kinds of horrendous and hideous situations. Sexual integrity is always under assault. It always has been, and especially in our culture, whether married or single, sexual integrity is always under assault. The subtleties, of course, are too many to list, but they are there. We must beware of pornography. We live in a culture of shamelessness. We are assaulted with soft pornography in movies and commercials all the time. And it can easily allure the mind into harder forms of pornography and destroy the soul in the process. When they were interviewing Ted Bundy, the mass murderer in Washington, just before his execution, he was interviewed. And in that interview, he said, I discovered pornography accidentally in my father's office desk. That led me to harder things, to the point of desiring things that were not imaginable, he said, and caused me to go further and further to the point of killing as a sexual act. He says, and now what I've seen lately, even in prison, is beyond anything I could have ever imagined seeing during the times when I did what I did. So the types of pornographies available today are absolutely horrific, and they will destroy an entire life. We must be careful. There's also the attraction of false intimacy. It is an illusion designed to disintegrate the bond of marriage. And a healthy emotional life can be destroyed by the illusion of false intimacies. The usual symptoms that occur and the usual environments that cause this are many times business environments and other types. How many times have we heard of the businessman running off with the secretary? But the usual symptoms that causes are progressive, and they are usually in what we could enumerate as four. First of all, what begins to occur is the alienation of emotions from the spouse and the family. The person no longer feels the emotions and the bonding they once did for their families. Then there is the dissatisfaction with the spouse. The spouse is no longer enough, no longer attractive, no longer romanceable, if I may use that term. And third, there is a disconnectedness to the spouse and family, no longer the desire to be around them. And then, of course, that leads to the breakup, to the obliteration of the relationship with spouse and the family. I mention this because this is so common today. The divorce for no cause today, at no fault divorces as they're called, have made it so easy for people to fall prey to these types of assaults on the marriage and on the family. We must be aware that these are crucial when we are dealing with our families. We must guard against these. We must set up a specific guard for each one of this area. And only you can deal with your own emotions. Only I can deal with my own emotions. I cannot tell you what to do. You know what you feel. You know what you deal with. And same with everyone around us. Then we must be very aware of what we call spirituality. These are challenges. We have the challenge of spirituality that we must deal with in our lives. Ephesians chapter 4. The Apostle Paul again bringing things down to practical living. Verse 17 says, "This I say therefore and testify in the Lord, that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk, in the futility of their mind, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God." This is no spirituality life, a life completely controlled by the passions and the body. He says, because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness in their heart, who being past feeling, the allurements have destroyed their capacity to have normal feelings anymore. He says, being past feeling, they have gone into all sorts, he says, of lewdness, to work all uncleanness with greediness. In other words, they're never satisfied, ever. Lust is a bottomless cup. You can never fill it, regardless of the type of lust that might be. Because we are trying to fill spiritual cups with carnal things, and it cannot be done. So he says, continue saying, 20, but you have not so learned Christ, if indeed you have heard him and have been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus, that you put off concerning your former conduct the old man, which grows corrupt according to deceitful lusts, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on the new man, which was created according to God in true righteousness and holiness. Then in chapter 5, verse 15, he says, see then that you walk circumspectly. It means walk with your eyes wide open. Be on the watch. He says, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Therefore do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. It takes spirituality to live this way. Moral virtue is the greatest of all strengths. The twofold structure that comes to us in testing are temptation and trials, as we try to live spiritually in this life. Temptation, of course, is designed to bring out the worst in us, and this is the devil's technique. In chapter 6 and verse 16, he says, above all, taking the shield of faith, with which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one. Because it is in the area of faith we remind ourselves who we are and who provides for us and who will protect us if we just submit to him and let him take over. So temptation is designed to bring out the worst in us. This is where the devil is involved. But trials is the second form. But trials are designed to bring out the best in us. This is God's technique. Let us read there in 1 Peter chapter 1. I want you to see this with me. And the Apostle Peter is explaining to these persecuted Christians what God's purpose is in all this. In 1 Peter 1 verse 3. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to his abundant mercy has begotten us again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible, and defiled and does not fade away, reserved in heaven for you. See the motivation? Who are kept by the power of God through faith for salvation, ready to be revealed in the last time. In this you greatly rejoice, though now, for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials, that the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ. So here you see that trials are designed to bring out the best in us. They're designed to bring out the eternal qualities in us. Children see everything. Children feel everything. They learn everything from mom and dad. They see everything we do. They see our reactions. They see our planning. They see how we manage situations. And you are your child's incredible mentor. We are forging character and memories in our children's souls. Everything we say and do is permanent in them. There was something written about memory, and I want to share it. Memory is an exquisite and beautiful thing in our nature that when the heart is touched and softened by some tranquil happiness or affectionate feeling, the memory of those gone comes most over us, and it is most powerful and irresistible when we are in that trance. It would seem almost as though our better thoughts and sympathies were charms in virtue of which the soul is enabled to hold some vague and mysterious encounter with the spirits of those whom we loved in life. You see, memory goes deeper than simple thought and simple musings. It is inextricably linked to our spirits. Memory, in fact, is as sacred as life and death. To conclude, parenthood is the art of molding our children. We must learn to be artists, and we must practice and practice and practice. And remember that in practice, there are always errors and mistakes. Be willing to admit to your child that you are human and that you do make mistakes. Be willing to humble yourself and to apologize when it is necessary. Every child, as we said, that we have in our power, in our possession, whether our children or grandchildren, they are like the painter's palette. They are the sculptor's marble block. They are the potter's precious clay in our hands. And our challenge as parents is to create a masterpiece for God. And so as we realize these things, we want to be sure and certain that we put the importance in raising our children that God intended us. And I want to repeat again the poem I read this morning from God with Love about children. Children are a blessing sent from God above for us to care and nurture, and most of all, to love. God calls us to be parents and gives us the tools. And when we feel like giving up our strength, He will renew. Children are a gift from God that He so freely lends. To make it through the childhood years, on Him we must depend. He must have a presence. You see, it must take three, the parents, child, and Christ at the center to be a family. From childhood days to a child full grown, their joys and hurts are a parent's own. Times of joy and laughter and those times of tears, the time spent raising a child, are surely the best of years. There comes that time in life when a child will leave the nest. We must send them off with love and a prayer and leave to God the rest. We have shared the Word of God. We've taught them right from wrong. Now it's time to let them go on and let them write their own song. The faith instilled, the examples lived, and the lessons taught, all gifts that we've given our child will never be forgotten. There are many paths a child can take. Right or wrong will remain unknown. But rest assured that in the end, they all lead back to home. Children will never forget what we have done for them, what we have done with them as our children. And as we said, we cannot be the kind of parents that God would have us to be if we are not first in His family as children of God. And we must understand that when we are God's children, we have the greatest of responsibilities when raising our own children. Let us keep these thoughts as we go through our lives, and may they be useful to us and those that come into our lives, those we encounter and whose lives we can impact as God's children, in helping them deal with theirs when they need us for help and advice and encouragement.